Hello, I'm Brandon Lewis, founder of the Academy for Professional Painting Contractors, and I want to reintroduce someone to you that I've known for over a decade, whose expertise in organization and management can help you take your business to the next level. She's worked with tons of small business owners just like you, and she was so well received by our membership, and I enjoyed our conversation so much that I've welcomed her back here. And if it's okay, I'm going to take a moment to read a little bit about Melissa Gratias, Dr. Melissa Gratias, no less. She earned her PhD in industrial and organizational psychology at Wake Forest University, and she has spent 20 years helping small business owners get out of bad, low-pay, high-stress habits. She's worked with corporate leaders, large institutions, and she helps them to continue to discover more ways to be productive, to get rid of the things that stifle motivation, and to make them feel more fulfilled. And so all of this so they can finally move on to achieve the goals that they ultimately want. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us again, and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Brandon. It takes an expert like you to find people to talk because you know your audience. So I'm really, really privileged to be here with you again and to speak to your clients and colleagues.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. So it's been a while. So why don't you give us a little bit more about your background? I know I read a little bit here, but talk about your story so people can understand your vantage point.
Thank you, Brandon. I was not one of those people who was born organized. I was not born as I was not a child who lined up their socks in their sock drawer. Systematic thinking and planning is absolutely foreign to me. So I will say that the first few years in corporate America, when I got my first real job, were a struggle. I was throwing more and more hours at my job to get the same amount of work done that everybody else seemed to be getting done. And I got that realization in my 20s that was basically saying, I've got to do the proverbial work smarter thing, because all I'm doing is working harder and harder and harder, doing the same things, but spending more time doing them. So I embarked on that time on a journey of self-study. I took every training class that I could get my hands on. I read every book that I could, a lot of Stephen Covey stuff, so you'll hear his influence in my talking today. But it was all about learning how to better manage my time, my tasks, my resources, and myself. And it took me a good 7 years. I will say that when I finally got there, when I got to the point where I felt like I could both handle the work that was on my plate currently and had bandwidth to take on more, as my husband, he's from Minnesota, so I don't know where he got this very Southern expression. I up and quit my job. That's what Eric says, Melissa, up and quit her job. And I opened up my consultancy 10 years ago, the time I met you, my friend, when in order to help people like me, people who by every personality test known to psychology should not succeed in the workplace. But people like us, I want to help us be more effective, productive, organized, to realize that these are skill sets to be developed and not traits that you're either born with or you're not. And if you're not, you're out of luck. So that's my background, and in my joy and my passion is to help business owners, executives, attorneys, and accountants be more individually productive as well as collectively as teams and entire companies. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm glad to be here to talk to you about it, Brandon.
Well, we're glad that you can share some insights with us. I'd like to talk about your new ebook, Love Your Calendar and Be Monogamous. I can't believe I could say monogamous without stumbling over it. If I found one recurring trait of your successful owners, it's that they have allocated some small percentage of their calendar to doing something that's more than $12 or $20 or $50 per hour work. So much of what we do, we could hire someone to do for $10, $15 an hour, maybe $50, $60 an hour. And when we look at our income goals, that level of productivity and allocation doesn't work if you don't have a good foundation of activities. So why don't you talk about how you think about, conceptualize the calendar and its use, and how important it is for small business owners?
The economics of time management it's a really fun topic that I would like to talk about today. And the calendar, your calendar, is the tool with which you manage this incredibly valuable resource, which is the 24 hours you are given in a day. Time management is it's not allocated based on how smart we are. Time is not allocated based on how smart we are, how pretty we are, how much schooling we have, anything. Everybody gets the same amount. We all get the same 24 hours in a day. Without a calendar, without knowing that that you have this tool, you are just kind of making decisions in the spur of the moment, and once an hour is gone, it is not retrievable. If $1 is lost, there are things we can do. Our behaviors can change in order to increase our bottom line. We can do different things and make up for a loss of money. We can't make up for a loss of time. And a calendar is two things. It is the very practical, write down this appointment there, write down this address in there, block off this amount of time. It's a very practical thing that we use, because otherwise I don't know how anyone would know that they have a dentist appointment 6 months from now on Thursday at 2:00 if they didn't write it down in their calendar. So the practical utility of a calendar is undeniable. But what I talk about in the ebook, Brandon, is that it is the woo factor. It is the part of a calendar that makes it really magical is how you realize that this is how I'm defining my life. Stephen Covey, I warned you. Stephen Covey said that he said in one of his books, I can tell what's important to any person by looking at their calendar. I can tell what's important to any person by looking at their calendar. And I will, and just to illustrate this otherness of your calendar, I'll tell you a story about when I was on an airplane on a business trip during that 7-year self-discovery time management period. But I was on a business trip, and I read that line by Stephen Covey, and I opened up my trusty Franklin planner, because at that time that we all had our Franklin planners. And so I opened it up and I was flipping through it. And if I had been a stranger, didn't know me, looking at this person's calendar, I would have thought this was a single workaholic, no kids, no friends, no nothing other than that is the impression I would have had of that person. So the otherness of a calendar is that it is nothing more or less than who you are. It's how you spend your time. So small business owners, I encourage them to think beyond the names and dates and appointments and addresses to the otherness of a calendaring system, to think about it as this is how I manage this fleeting and valuable resource, which defines me, and it's my time.
Wow, that's right. I've always heard if you want to know what really matters to someone, that you can look at where they spend their time and money. But if you want to figure out where they spend their time, a glance reveals a lot. In your book, you talk about red flags as it relates to managing your time. Can you, and especially as managing your calendar, what are they?
Oh, well, first of all, red flags in general, that I've written my entire ebook series based on what I see as red flag behaviors, which are things that will trip a person up almost every time. They are things that we are all prone to do, but will make our lives run amok. So red flags are those behaviors that trip us up every time. Now, I also talk about yellow flag behaviors, which are things about which we need to be cautious. Mm-hmm. They can be good. They can be bad in excess, that type of thing. And then I also talk about green flag behaviors, which are ways to really elevate our thinking and ourselves to the next level with our productivity skills. So red flags specifically with calendar, I'd like to mention one right now, and it's failing to place any limits on your available time. It is this always available mentality that has partially been brought on by the ubiquity of mobile devices and the fact that we are now taking our work with us everywhere we go, absolutely everywhere we go. Who 25 years ago would have, guessed that we could answer email, sitting on a beach somewhere? It just, so the always available mentality that there are no boundaries, there are no limits. I am here for you, work world, everybody, no matter where I am or what I'm doing, and that is a red flag behavior that will get a person overwhelmed, feeling underappreciated. And the best thing to do when you are in that situation where you are always available is to set boundaries. And believe me when I tell you, and you probably know this, Brandon, that if you don't set boundaries for yourself, your boss, your clients, they're certainly not going to. They're not going to do that. I tell people that your calendar is the shield with which you defend your balanced life. And no one's going to hold that shield for you. So the one red flag behavior that I go into in great detail in the book is as what limits to place and how to place them, because this always available mentality, that is a serious red flag behavior with calendar and life management.
Well, about 6 or 7 months ago, it's probably been almost a year now, I took my emails and my social media and everything work related off of my cell phone. And it took me about 6 months to quit habitually checking the thing. And now, I thought about writing a book called Nothing to Check.
That's amazing.
To check. If somebody doesn't phone you, if a friend doesn't text you, it's just a phone. And I've been so much happier. And I've talked to our guys about that, and it can really eat up a lot of bandwidth. Now, you talk about give us some examples about a few, maybe 2 or 3 boundaries that are helpful to set that help you be more productive, or either help you spend time doing the things that you're working for. What's the purpose of all this slaving and answering people and getting back to folks if we're not trying to achieve some sort of lifestyle or purpose? Talk about a few boundaries that we can set that help us achieve those work-related and after-hours goals.
Well, I will say that one of the first questions I ask a new coaching client, Brandon, is, what are your work hours? Let's go, every day of the week and talk to me about when you start and when you stop work. And that is such a telling question, because I oftentimes get the bunny in the headlights look of, what do you mean? When do I start work? As soon as the alarm goes off, I pull my phone off the nightstand and there we go. And then I'm off and running, and I stop work right before I turn off the light to go to bed. So what are your work hours? And in terms of boundaries that I have people set, as I say, okay, let's really rethink the start and the end of the workday.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those are 2 boundaries that absolutely need to be set. Now, are you going to be perfect at adhering to them? No. But we're really not going for perfection. Perfection is not productive. We're going for, I tell my clients to go for the 80%. If 80% of the time you are honoring your workout, your goal work hours, your start and your end times, then you are stellar. So those are 2 boundaries I would recommend. The third boundary that I would recommend, Brandon, is a more general one. I talk to my clients a lot about how they behave when they're on vacation, when they are taking paid time off or unpaid time off from work. What happens then? One thing that my husband and I used to do early on in the cell phone era, when it was not as obvious how to turn on and off the email, and I didn't go quite to the extreme that you had, but wow, Brandon, you do need to write that book. Anyway, on vacation with my husband. Okay, I'm back. Like I said, I'm a little distractible. So Eric and I would switch cell phones. I would take his for the week and he would take mine, because I didn't care what emails he got and he didn't care what emails I got. So we would just switch phones, but we still had each other's phones, so we could reach out and touch each other when we were at Universal Studios or wherever it was. So boundaries, 3 of them. What time do I start work? What time do I stop work? And what do I do when I'm on vacation? those are some boundaries that are very, very important to have them be intentional and not just allow yourself to be always available and only stop work when they stop needing you for the day.
And they'll never stop needing you. And there's a world of things we could talk about as it relates to training people to use their own brains, giving them the tools they need to succeed, etc. But once you've committed to this boundary setting, this fence building around things that are important to you and setting limits, most people have done this a few times at some point. And now some people have never even considered it, but almost everybody has had that discussion with the spouse about, kids aren't seeing you, I'm not seeing you, you're worn out, you're distracted, you're working at home, etc. Everybody at some point has probably had that conversation and found themselves right back in the same situation or similar, lest they have a heart attack or a stroke or something really major changes their behavior. So anybody can build fences temporarily. How do you keep them in place? How do you keep them mended and keep distractions out of it? Chief of all distractions being yourself. How do you make sure that those fences are strong?
Well, I was at a luncheon the other week, Brandon, and this very smart businesswoman sitting next to me asked, "What is your number one tip?" Which that's really hard when you're talking about a lifetime of study. And she said, "What is your number one tip?" And I said, "What is your number one issue?" And I couldn't quite answer the question, but when a couple of minutes later, I actually came up with it. And it relates back to the question that you just asked me, Brandon. And this is so silly, and it's been said so often, but people really resist doing this. Are you listening?
I'm listening.
Okay. Turn off all notifications of incoming mail, incoming Facebook messages, incoming, all these things that tell us, stop doing whatever you are doing right now and pay attention to this device. Exactly. Turn those off. Now, you took it to an amazing level, Brandon, and just removed the access. But I would say a good majority of the people are not going to be able to do that for various personal and professional reasons. So at a minimum, turning off those notifications at least allows you to engage with your email on your terms. And don't turn off the notifications just on your devices. Turn them off on your laptop, desktop, whatever it is. If you're an Outlook user, a Microsoft Outlook user, it is pre-programmed to do and everything but stand up and dance the cha-cha. When you get an incoming message, stop what you're doing, you have mail, whatever. So that's one thing. But you bring up a good point, Brandon. Blocking off time on the calendar is really, really easy. The difficult part is honoring the time that you have blocked off. And when I'm walking a client through this process, for example, let me give you a concrete example. And I'll be working with an executive and they'll say, I have no desk time. I have no time. I'm in meetings, 80% of my days. I have no time at my desk just to work and think and do the things that I'm supposed to be doing at my desk. So we block off desk time, for example. When we block off desk time, that is not the end of the process because blocking it off is really easy. We establish some desk time laws. And we say, okay, desk time will be given up because, we know it's going to be because perfection is not productive. Desk time will only be given up in these very specific circumstances. When an executive VP or above calls me into a meeting, if I break my leg, I'm just being silly, but go ahead and anticipate the pitfalls, the things that would cause you to give up this blocked off time. Plan for them, and then that will help you remain true to what you had wanted to do to begin with, which is honor that blocked off time.
So we've blocked off time. We've set a few rules. Essentially, it sounds crazy. We have to go through all these mental and psychological and physical machinations to block off some time on our calendar, and now we're finally there, right? And we've got uninterrupted time on our hands, which typically most people who are not used to manufacturing uninterrupted time immediately begin to interrupt it themselves. not somebody else. Like we immediately gravitate to the simple things that we routinely do that keep us away from the hard things that make us money or make us more productive or solve a problem permanently. So once you do set aside this time, how do you make sure that you get the most out of the time that you set aside working? How do you use your time well and anticipate these routine setbacks that have derailed you in the past?
Well, one of my other ebooks in the series is called Corral Your To-Dos and Don't Rely on Your Brain at All. And one of the red flags that I think is in that ebook that is most pertinent to this discussion is to avoid the memory trap, Brandon. So you've set aside this time and to do desk work or whatever it is that you've set aside the time to do. If you have to then dig back in your memory, what is it I need to do with this? You are subjecting yourself to lots of fallacies of human memory, recency effect. All sorts of misprioritization errors will happen if you try to rely on your memory. Human memory is a very, very faulty way to manage our actions and our tasks. So if you are not already downloading your brain onto a centralized, comprehensive task or to-do list, whatever you want to call it, you will typically struggle over and over again with managing that time well, because you're relying on your memory. You're having to figure out what it is I was supposed to do next. And you also are subjecting yourself to a lot of really unnecessary stress, because human beings, we can typically remember between 5 and 9 bits of information off of a list, and that's on a good day. And most busy people have 40, 50, or even more items on a comprehensive to-do list.
Wow.
So we're offering ourselves a great opportunity to forget a whole lot of stuff if we fall into the memory trap. So that is the number one recommendation. If you want to use the time well, don't rely on your memory. Rely on a to-do list.
I believe there's a short, pithy quote that was, I believe a lot, the shortest pen is better than the longest memory. And so whenever I'm talking to someone who's not writing things down, I'm immediately suspect of their abilities, because I'm fairly bright, but given, 2 or 3 minutes and a distraction, I can't recall anything, know what I need to do. I'm a constant list rewriter. I've tried to go digital several times, and I've got lots of comprehensive digital tools in my world that I use, from Infusionsoft to all kinds of advertising and marketing things. But when it comes to getting my stuff done, paper, pen, and a few folders can build anything from the Brooklyn Bridge to a span across a creek. I think we overcomplicate things sometimes. So let's talk about, go ahead, Melissa, what were you saying?
No, I said what was that quote again, Brandon? The
shortest pen is better than the longest memory.
That is fantastic.
You can steal it.
I might steal it and pretend I came up with it.
Yes, everything I know I have stolen from someone.
Excellent.
And a few wallets and a purse or two here or there. Hard times. So for a long time, and I can remember this, and this seems to have been in the early to 90s to maybe mid 2000s, people would actually put that they were looking for multitaskers to work for them. You had to have the ability to multitask. And study after study has shown recently that what anybody would know is what your, Pawpaw probably told your grandmother, that you can't do 2 things at the same time and pay attention and focus, etc. So what have you learned about multitasking, or what has recently been called switch tasking? What have you learned about that? How does it keep people from achieving their goals? Is it a misnomer? Is it possible? How's it helpful? How's it hurtful?
Well, you've nailed it already with calling it switch tasking, Brandon, because multitasking as a word is a misnomer. We're not multitasking. We're not doing 2 things at the same time, or 3 or 4. We are not doing that. Our brain doesn't work that way. We are rapidly switching back and forth between checking email and listening to that webinar. We're switching back and forth, and in that process of task switching, there is a resumption lag, because you have to, and this is in nanoseconds, that you have to your brain has to adjust the switch back to task number one, and there's a resumption lag there. And then when you switch back to task number two, there's a resumption lag there. There's all these task intervals. I mean, there's all these things that keep us from actually doing two things at one time. Our brains don't work that way. Now, you're absolutely right as well that some employers, and it makes me cringe whenever I see a job description or a job posting with multitasking skills essential on it. But it's like, really? But I will say this, studies have shown that there are 2% of the population that are known as supertaskers. Now, this is just a word that researchers have given to people who can do a very rote, very basic task at the same time as another very basic task. And they can do both of those things simultaneously with good result. 2% of the population. 98% of people think they're good at this, but only 2% of people actually are good at doing this. Otherwise, we are switching back and forth. And there's been a lot of research on this, and people think the ivory tower academics are crazy. And here's an example. At the University of London, they did a study where they had participants taking an IQ test. So they were taking this IQ test, and there was the normal condition where people come in and they sit down and take an IQ test. Then they had sleep deprived people taking the IQ test. And then they had, wait for it, people who had just smoked marijuana taking the IQ test. So we had those three conditions. And basically, I'm sorry, there was another condition, the multitasking people. There were people who were multitasking. They were taking the IQ test and they were having to do something else on the computer. So we had these people on there, and you would think the people who were high might have scored the lowest, but no, it was the multitaskers. Yeah. They scored lower than the people who'd smoked pot and the sleep deprived individuals. I mean, it was crazy. And so of course the Wall Street Journal grabbed this study and printed this headline: "Multitasking makes you stupid," and it was so funny. And but seriously, that's what we're talking about here. So the alternative, people say, well, what should I do? The alternative is unitasking, spotlight tasking, whatever you want to call it, where you give yourself permission to focus on one thing at a time. Turning off those notifications is a great way to start. But another tool that I have habitual multitaskers use is a timer. I mean, it's on our phone. It comes standard on the iPhone and Android as well. Mm-hmm. That you just open up the timer app and you say, I am giving myself permission for the next 15 minutes to exclusively work on this one thing. I'm going to shut down email. I'm going to focus. It's the intention. It is you have an intention to do this. You have the tools to do it with the timer. And when the timer goes off, you can multitask or switch or decide I want to spend another 15 minutes doing this. For clients who really have serious, I guess the word is addiction to multitasking, mm-hmm. I will even recommend the Pomodoro technique, which is look it up if you are interested. It's a way of working where you spend these 25-minute intervals on focused tasks with 5-minute breaks in between. Huh. So look up the Pomodoro technique. But yeah, those are my main recommendations with multitasking. But it always starts with just acknowledging it's an inefficient way to work. If you can acknowledge that, then you will be much less likely to fall into that trap during your workday.
So we have identified all kinds of red flags. We've set aside some time. We're recognizing and anticipating some roadblocks. We've debunked a few things that obviously do not work. We got to pick a calendar now. And how do you pick it? And I'm going to go ahead and couple a couple of things together here. Most owners, not all, but most owners, except perhaps solopreneurs, have multiple people that are influencing their calendar. If nothing else, you have a spouse. I can't tell you how many times between my assistant and my spouse and me, I have failed to put on my calendar that I'm going out of town on vacation and I can't work the Friday before we leave to go out of town. It's just a short trip. And all of a sudden, Jennifer's sticking appointments in there. Now, we've got to leave later. I've got to move a bunch of people around. And then on top of that, you've got people that run service businesses or perhaps are attorneys with attorneys that work underneath them that have multiple trial calendars. In our case, it's estimators, it's production managers, etc. How do you choose a calendar where you've got multiple people influencing it, and what are some rules for managing it?
I would say that, first of all, the selection of the tool is not nearly as important as how you use it. Mm-hmm. Because, as you discovered with your vacation example, if you don't, you can have the very, very best calendar tool in the entire universe, but if you don't put an appointment on it, then it's not going to help you. A car is only as good as its driver. So I'm not one to emphasize tools as much as behaviors and rituals that you use to keep these things updated. But there are some certain considerations when choosing a calendaring system. And I would say I'm not one for hard and fast rules. Psychology is a study of individual differences. Everybody's unique and wonderful, but the closest I come to a hard and fast rule for anything are that we are at a point in our work, in our society, where paper-based calendars are more inefficient than efficient. Okay, so that rubs some people the wrong way, but I'm advising clients to go electronic with their calendar. Now, with other things like to-do list or task lists, paper can work fine depending upon, again, how you use it. But with calendars, there is no substitute for an electronic calendar because it is shareable. It's shareable and it's backed up somewhere other than that piece of paper. It's not subject to loss or damage like a paper calendar is. So an electronic calendar, I typically tell a client, use the one that comes with your email. Because if email is a tool that we're in all the time. So if you're a Google user, then Gmail has a calendaring system in it, and even in Gmail you can set up multiple calendars if you have different schedules to manage, and give access to your calendar to those who need it. Your spouse, my husband has access to I use Outlook. He has access to my Outlook calendar. We are constantly, Eric and I, sending invitations back and forth to each other just so that I know where he's going to be and he knows where I'm going to be. So I have, his color code in my calendar is gray. So if there's a gray appointment in there, it's not my appointment, it's Eric's appointment. I just have to know that he's there. So we send, even though he works for a company where I can't be on his server and in his calendar like one of his colleagues could, we still have found ways to communicate our calendars electronically to each other. And so make sure your people who need access to your calendar have access to it, and that it is electronics, and there are definite benefits to using the calendaring system that comes with your email, because it's there. And it's in a system with which you're familiar, and you'll be more likely to keep it updated because when you're in your email, you're also in your calendar.
Absolutely, and just for the record, I'm pretty sure I know where you come down on this. How do you feel about multiple calendars for an individual?
Multiple calendars offer the opportunity to miss a lot of things. People ask me this question a lot, and the example they give is, well, should I put my personal appointments on my business calendar? And my answer is typically yes, you should keep one and only one calendar, because you don't hang up your humanity when you enter the workplace. You still are that whole person. And if you put your doctor's appointments one place and your work appointments another place, then you're going to schedule over your doctor's appointment every time and twice on Sundays. So I do advise people to use their work calendar for their personal appointments. And most work calendaring systems, I know Outlook does particularly, has an option to mark an appointment private. So if it is none of anybody else's business that you're going to a doctor's appointment, you can mark the appointment private and it won't show up where you are. It will just show up that you are gone. And people will be less likely, not always unlikely, but less likely to schedule a conflicting meeting with that private appointment.
It's a good idea. So I have guys, especially in our world, it's like we're either solopreneurs or we've had maybe 3 or 4 office staff and a bunch of painters, sometimes a lot more staff. We've got folks $6-7 million all the way down to a couple of million to a few $100,000. And they're like, I don't want everybody seeing what's going on my calendar. And I'm just like, you've hired the wrong people. But at any rate, that's a whole nother conversation. I think you can marketing it private is probably the easiest way to do that. So you talked about managing time as money and drew a parallel between those two concepts to really drive home how important time is. And as you mentioned before, there is some ability for reclamation with financial losses, not so with time. So what kind of exercises, concepts, thoughts can you have to try to really drive home the point that managing your time is as important as managing your money, and perhaps they should be done similarly?
And this is such an important concept. We mentioned it earlier in our discussion today, Brandon, but let me encourage anyone watching this right now to do one thing. If you do not know what your hourly rate is, what an hour of your time is worth, if you get nothing else out of this discussion today, I really hope that you will figure that out. There are lots of ways to calculate your hourly rate. If you're an attorney or an accountant, you know it just like that, or a consultant who bills by the hour. It's very straightforward when you bill by the hour to understand what your hourly rate is. But especially with small business owners, there's draws and there's profits and there's all these things that complicate our salaries. But figure out what an hour of your time is worth. Figure out if you can't make a calculation like an annual salary divided by, plus 30% for benefits, by the way, divided by 2,080, which is the number of full-time hours in a year. So you can do it. If you have an annual salary, you can do that calculation with, and you'll be able to calculate your hourly rate. But if you don't have that, know or think about, what would I pay someone to do the job that I'm doing? What would I have to pay them? And just know your hourly rate. Once you have that information, then hiring someone at 1/3 of your hourly rate to do a lot of the work that you yourself are currently handling makes more sense.
Yeah.
Delegating work appropriately. I'm working with a small business owner in Kentucky right now, and I asked him the question. I said, is it a good use of company resources for your firm to pay your hourly rate to do this accounting task that your direct report so-and-so should be doing at her hourly rate? And that was just kind of like for him, it was a revelation. He was like, oh my goodness, I am misappropriating money.
Yes.
I'm not delegating. I'm not spending my money well. So if you want to manage time like you manage money, understand what your hourly rate is and act accordingly.
I've recommended before that our guys take whatever it is that they want to make this year, divide it by 1960 if you're going to take a couple of vacation weeks, and then multiply it by 3. And I teach them to multiply it by 3 because if you're going to get out of the hubbub of your life to do something and set aside time that's not in distraction, you don't have many of those hours. So when you do set aside the time, it can't only be worth what normally your time would be worth. It's got to be worth even more, because the rest of your life is full of things that sometimes you just have to do even though you don't want to, because there's not enough money in the business, you're wearing too many hats, whatever. So I think more often than not, people undervalue their time than they tend to overvalue it. It's been my experience. So I've got a question, and this is the last one that I think I'll ask. When owners are looking at their calendar and they're trying to figure out what time of day to put certain tasks, and then I'll have you give me your closing thoughts. What are your recommendations? You've helped people work through overcoming probably procrastination challenges, working on projects they've identified as being breakthrough projects, but they just keep pushing it back. It could be, for most professionals, it could be writing a book, or it could be putting a new sales system in place, or hiring this key individual in operations, but they've not done it. Who do you recommend that that really important, high energy, high focus tasks be put on the calendar?
I would say if a person is struggling with not accomplishing the things they set out to do, that from a big picture standpoint, these important things are being procrastinated, they're just not happening. It's not so much a calendaring issue at that point. It's an issue of the goals that they have set for themselves, in my opinion. One of my ebooks is Set Goals Even If You're Not Sure You'll Actually Achieve Them. And in there, I recommend being very, very specific with identifying the mountaintop and the distance to which you are striving. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, you're looking straight down at the path and you're wandering your way through the trees. So setting goals, especially those that are specific goals that you kind of have there's an option or a chance that you could fail. I mean, they're challenging goals. You're not just putting out things out there that I could do in my sleep. I'm setting a goal that is challenging, that is specific. If you set specific challenging goals, it is like a rubber band. I wish I had one in front of me, but I don't. Between where I am now and where I want to be. This is where I am now. This is where I want to be. And picture a rubber band in between these two fingers. And the more that there's a gap between where I am and where I want to be, the more that rubber band stretches. You are the rubber band, okay? That you are that thing being stretched between those 2 points, and that is inherently uncomfortable. When human beings are confronted with discomfort, our instinct is to alleviate it. So in a goal-setting sense, highly motivated people will be motivated to alleviate the discomfort by bringing their current state closer to where their goal state is. Okay, so if we're having problems getting things done, getting the big things done, procrastinating, it's just not making it onto our calendar, likely we're not stretched enough. Because that stretch is the essence, the foundation of motivation. We're just not stretching ourselves enough. That's what I think.
Well, I think that's a good place to leave it. Do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners? Anything that you feel encapsulates what we've spoken about today?
Basically, your calendar is a tool, but I really would like to leave people with the thought that it's more than just a place to note your appointments. It is nothing more or less than tangible evidence of what you find important in life. Mm-hmm. It will help you define what kind of professional you are, what kind of parent you are, the spouse, whatever your various roles are. Your calendar should be a reflection of that. If you are struggling with who am I and why am I here on this earth, that may be something to take a look at your calendar and ask yourself, how am I spending my time? And is there a gap between how I am spending my time and how I wish to be doing so? And if there is, a calendar is a great way to start reducing the tension and bridging that gap between where I am and where I want to be as a person.
Well, that is a good place. Melissa, you've been so very kind with your time. Tell people how they can learn more about you, access more of your wonderful information, including some of your other ebooks that you have mentioned here today.
Thank you, Brandon. In addition to being a big talker, as I'm sure you've picked up on, I'm a writer as well. So I invite everyone watching this to subscribe to my newsletter. It is free to those of you who would like to go to my website and sign up for it. You'll get an article from me every other week with what thoughts on productivity, life, the universe, and everything. My website, if you're ready for it, is melissagratias.com, and my last name, because it's completely not spelled the way it's pronounced, indulge me for a second while I spell this for you. It's melissagratias.com. So melissagratias.com, you'll find my blog, you'll find a newsletter sign up, and there is a link for the ebooks if you're interested in reading more about those.
Well, thank you, Miss Melissa. So go to Melissa Gratias melissa.gratias.com, just in case you're phonetically worried about how to get there. It's Melissa Gratias, not pronounced that way, .com, and you can get these wonderful resources. So thank you for sharing 2 decades worth of wisdom with our listeners today. I appreciate you very much. Until next time, I'm Brandon Lewis, signing off.